Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer.
Anyone else wants to come on, Mike? I guess my concern is, are we talking, I mean, this discussion we were just having, this is one application of and one context in which these well-being measures are used and considered. Is that relevant to the choice between interventions we're talking about now? Because, the approach to sort of trying to see how much do people value income versus other things and comparing the regression coefficients, is that kind of a different, anyways, you get the question I'm asking. Caspar, please.
Yeah, two quick views on this. One is, yes, because so the worry would be that imagine you're doing one of two interventions. Let's say you're either doing canonically, I guess, psychotherapy or a direct cash transfer. And now, if we're only talking about the comparability question, let's leave aside the linearity stuff. Then what you might worry about is that if a person suddenly, has received psychotherapy, they will interpret these questions in a different way. And you might now believe that, I don't know, individuals now interpret these questions in a looser way. And therefore, whereas when they receive a cash transfer, they interpret these questions in a stricter way. And as a consequence of that, the relative cost effectiveness of psychotherapy would go down. But of course, this can also go the other way around. You could also believe that, as a consequence of psychotherapy, you now think of these terms as much more weighty than you did before. And so therefore now you are changing your use of a life satisfaction scale in such a way that an underlying life well-being of a certain amount suddenly now translates to a lower number. Currently, we don't, I think, know whether there are effects of cash transfers in particular, or psychotherapy in particular, or lead interventions in particular, on the way people are using scales. It would surprise me in the case of lead, but I could imagine it for the other two. So it's a source of uncertainty. But crucially, and I think this gets lost in this debate, many of these kinds of concerns are also occurring variants of this in other metrics. Maybe not the comparability stuff, but for example, the linearity thing. One might say that, in QALYs and DALYs, linearity is baked in, but it's only baked in under extremely strong assumption about how people reason about time trade-offs. So when we're attacking the well-being under these kinds of concerns, we should also do that for the other potential types of measures. Otherwise, I think we're attacking one thing without attacking the other thing, while the other thing still has, similar kinds of worries associated with it. And we just don't worry about them because they're older.
I want to build on what Caspar was just saying about concerns with other approaches. I think it's useful to think about the kind of counterfactual to using well-bees, like what else would we do, or not well-be specifically, but self-reported well-being measures. I think the natural alternative that we would consider is some kind of revealed preference approach. And just as Caspar was saying, I think some of the same issues come up. So for example, if we use revealed preference and think about costs and benefits in dollar terms, there's an implicit assumption that a dollar is worth the same to everybody, unless you do, and then there's attempts to deal with that with social marginal welfare weights. But, the baseline cost benefit approach is making an assumption like a linearity assumption. There's also analogs for many of the other assumptions. And I think it's important for two reasons. One, as Caspar was emphasizing, it's, we should be evaluating the self-reported well-being approach relative to the next best alternative. So the fact that it has these, that we may not have solutions to these problems doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, because what we'd be doing anyway would have the same or similar problems. And the second is, there are kind of ad hoc solutions that are adopted in the revealed preference approach that that could be carried over, and they'd be just as ad hoc, but similarly so. So for example, the question of where is the 0 point? I mean, there's no definitive answer to that question in the revealed preference approach. There's different ways of trying to estimate it. They're imperfect. And I think you could use, similar approaches in the self-reported well-being approach.
I wanted to bring two things in the conversation that are sort of related to this topic, but mostly I just wanted to introduce them as things to keep in mind. So one is this really, really painfully obvious point. So sorry, these are both things coming from the sort of charity evaluation grant making perspective, which I think are important to try to connect to the academic conversation. So one is the painfully obvious point that like the cash transfers are the benchmark via well-being, which I think is like probably obvious to everybody, but that seems like an important point. So so Peter gestured at other CG Peters research on well-being, and like so it's important obviously that like when we compare to cash transfers, we are directly comparing to a benchmark that's determined on the basis of well-being research about cash transfers, and not some other thing like VSL. So that seems like just an important thing to bear in mind. So I guess like an alternative way we could do this would be to just be thinking in like VSL equivalents for cash transfers and not talking about well-being at all. So that just sort of seems like an important alternate reality to keep in mind, and it's an obvious point. The other thing, which is probably more important to bring in the conversation, is my team's comfort, at least with kind of not having tackled some of these questions and with stuff like linear conversions, has to do with the fact that like ordinality is an overriding concern for us. And so to the extent, I think maybe Peter might have a different take for CG. I'm not sure how they do this sort of thing, but like to the extent that I forget what the math textbook phrase is, that these conversions are monotonic under a linear affine transformation. I don't remember what it is. To the extent that you can preserve the ordinality of different interventions using whatever conversion you use, it's basically been all the same to us. So we lose a little bit of fidelity there. Like we really do want to know like if stuff is like an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude better than something else in well-being terms. But a lot of the value is gained by having the ordinality preserved. And so like the idea that these different conversions preserve ordinality has led us to be comfortable with like a less conceptually coherent conversions. And so that seems like an important practical matter. And I guess I do have this sort of unknown as to whether like we are really missing a trick there. And it would still be better if we had more rigorous information. Like I said, we do make some allocation decisions on like a cardinal basis, and so it would be good. But I do want to flag that like the ordinality of well-being conversions is like a principal concern rather than getting the exact estimates right.
I think for us, I mentioned this $100,000 value per DALY. If we doubled that to 200,000, or if we reduced it to 50,000, that would change how some of our program areas look relative to others. So it's important. And I guess I'm looking forward to hearing more about the latest from the scale conversion research. But like, if kind of correcting for scale use heterogeneity means that income is way less valuable relative to health than we previously thought, that's an input that I think my team would want to consider. Kind of all that said, there's kind of at CG, I guess we've got this recognition that comes up in that report from the other Peter, that different methods to kind of comparing income and health can give you pretty different answers. And so we don't have like a formula that we're just going to commit to and plug in, and then one tweak will then make us double it. But yeah, I do think that like how income affects well-being versus how physical health affects well-being is an important question for us.
You here.